Yeah, I'm here. I mean, you're talking about Kentucky. You're talking about Thomas Massie. This is actually pretty interesting. Ed Gallrein has been called as the winner here. 72% of the vote in. It's just 7,000 supporting them, 54 to 45. But it's not anywhere in particular. It's in all of these populous states, these top 3 counties in the top of the state. Ed Gallrein winning all of them. Go to Oldham County, which is the most populous county in the west part of the state. He's winning that. Shelby County, where he's from, we still don't have votes there, but that's where he's originally from. But Lewis County, where Thomas Massie's in, he's won that. 85% of the vote in. He's got 63 to Ed Gallrein 35. But that's about it for the moment. So this has been a shellacking. And this follows on the heels of Indiana. It follows on the heels of Cassidy in Louisiana. There is still a price to pay for going up against Donald Trump. It's not universal, but Donald Trump has a lot more sway over Republican and MAGA voters than some of the polling might indicate that he does. And you're seeing this again. Thomas Massie, who has been a real gadfly, by the way, to everybody, and has been that way for a long time, losing his seat in Kentucky. And we're seeing some of that play out in other states, as we're about to see Pennsylvania close. We've seen Georgia close. Some of this is happening, but to think that Donald Trump, with the time he's got left in his presidency, is not the single most important force in Republican politics, if not in American politics right now, we're definitely seeing that play out tonight.
I would agree with that, Ali, but I want to put a little context on that, having done campaigns at the county, state, and national level. Yeah. I'd be very curious to find out what is the percentage of the Republican vote that turned out in this primary, because it's a critical part here. Yes. We make a big deal about the fact that, the congressman lost 52 to 45 or whatever the number is. But if only 20% of eligible registered Republican voters voted in the primary, again, what we've seen in our politics for the last 20 years are the edges are the ones that are driving the political narrative in all of these races, which is why the country needs to focus on primaries as a root cause to why you lose good men and women in public service, because of crap that you see when the party turns on its own. This is what you get.
And I will tell you, this is not competitive, right? The person who wins the primary tonight is probably going to be the member of Congress from that district. That's why I'm paying attention to Georgia right now, where only 21% of the vote is in the state Supreme Court election. Much tighter there, 20,000 votes separating. It's a nonpartisan rate test technically, but this is an actual election tonight. So this tells you more information than what the Thomas Massie race tells you. That is a primary that is being dominated by the extreme wing of the Republican Party, and that's why you're seeing something different, both in levels of turnout and as less of a reflection of the country as a whole. I'm actually more interested in this Georgia story, something people don't think about all that much. It's a state Supreme Court election, but this is an actual election between people who represent different parts of the political spectrum, and you're seeing a closer race in here. So it's a good point, Michael, to bring up as you're looking at what these results actually mean.
But the most closely watched race tonight was probably the Republican primary for Kentucky's 4th congressional district, where Donald Trump and his billionaire allies waged quite a retribution campaign to unseat conservative incumbent Congressman Thomas Massie. And tonight, the Associated Press projects that Trump-backed challenger Ed Gallrein has defeated Thomas Massie in that primary. Nearly $33 million, I should note, was spent in that race, making it the most expensive congressional primary race in history. Donald Trump was so determined to oust Massie, he personally attacked him multiple times on Truth Social just in the last few days at events, and on X, calling him things like the worst congressman and a rhino, and urging voters repeatedly to replace him. He even dispatched his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to campaign for Massie's opponent, of course, while the country is in the middle of a war. The point is this. It's clear that Trump really, really, really wanted Thomas Massie out of office. And tonight, after his backers spent millions and he had used his own bully pulpit over and over again to attack Massie, he succeeded. So why did Trump spend so much energy to defeat a conservative congressman in this Republican primary? Well, I think Thomas Massie actually said it best himself.
I vote with Republicans 91% of the time. And the 9% I don't, they're taking up for pedophiles, starting another war, or bankrupting our country.
That about says it all. Thomas Massie is one of the most conservative members of Congress. but he has refused to stick by Donald Trump on two fundamental issues, very big ones this year, where Trump has betrayed his own MAGA base. I mean, Massey co-sponsored the resolution that forced the release of the Epstein files, and he's been a vocal critic of the administration's efforts to cover them up. You see him there on the screen with a bunch of survivors. And he's also opposed Trump's war with Iran and even co-sponsored the War Powers Resolution to end that war. Tonight in his concession speech, Massey touted his work on exposing Epstein's enablers and co-conspirators and hinted that there may be more to come.
We need basic decency. That's what the Epstein Files Transparency Act was all about. By the way, today is the 6-month anniversary of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. We've taken out 24 CEOs, an ambassador, a prince, a prime minister, a minister of culture. And that was just 6 months. I got 7 months left in Congress.
That guy does not seem to be slinking away. He almost seemed gleeful about the 7 months he has left in Congress to do a lot more on that particular issue. So, yeah, I mean, the guy has been a very loyal conservative on nearly every issue. I probably disagree with him on a lot of policy issues, a whole host of them, maybe the majority. He's also been a huge thorn in the side of Trump. And that is why Trump wanted Massey out of office. So for Donald Trump, tonight's primary is supposed to be all about loyalty. I mean, he wants to show that Republicans who are not unflinchingly loyal to him and his administration will pay a price. That's what it's about. He's already ousted Republican Senator Bill Cassidy for his heretical vote to convict Trump over January 6th. And he did the same to several Indiana state lawmakers who bucked his agenda on redistricting. The message is supposed to be that the only way to stay in Trump's good graces is by showering him with praise, supporting whatever he does, and telling him he's just amazing all around. But here's the thing. It doesn't actually always work like that with Trump. Now, don't get me wrong, Republicans who oppose Trump will probably wind up facing some mean tweets and a Trump-endorsed primary opponent and maybe millions spent against them. Just ask Thomas Massey. But Republicans who stay loyal to Trump don't always get rewarded for their so-called good behavior either. I mean, just consider the case of Texas Senator John Cornyn, who has embarrassed himself over and over again trying to stay in Trump's good graces. In the Senate, Cornyn votes with Donald Trump 99% of the time, even more than his fellow Texas Senator Ted Cruz. He posts cringy photos of himself on social media. You see there's the one on your screen. That's him reading Trump's book, just hoping that Trump will notice him and tell him he's a good boy. Now, this year, Cornyn even introduced a bill to rename a highway after Donald Trump, but none of that seemed to matter to Donald Trump. Because despite all of that, Trump announced just today that he will endorse John Cornyn's primary opponent, Ken Paxton, in the Texas Republican Senate runoff next week. And Trump made that decision despite all of Cornyn's humiliating attempts to suck up to him, and despite the fact that Ken Paxton is a deeply flawed candidate. I mean, this guy has spent years under a massive cloud of indictments, impeachment, whistleblower allegations, repeated allegations of misconduct and abuse of office. And that doesn't even touch on the allegations of adultery from his former wife, who filed for divorce on what she called biblical grounds. So, yeah, that guy Trump just endorsed, well, he might have a harder time holding onto that seat. And that's why Senate Republicans spent months trying to convince Trump to back Cornyn, and why they're now reportedly livid about Trump's decision. I mean, after Trump's endorsement, Senator Lindsey Graham told reporters that he thinks the Texas Senate race will cost Republicans 3 times as much money with Ken Paxton as their nominee. And that's money that Republicans won't be able to spend in other races, like, say, defending Ohio Senator and Trump loyalist John Husted in his race against former Senator Sherrod Brown, or defending Alaska Senator and Trump loyalist Dan Sullivan in his race against Mary Peltola. Trump isn't just betraying John Cornyn. He seems to be betraying all of his loyal, spineless supporters in the Senate. What Trump has demonstrated tonight is that no amount of loyalty can save you from Trump's impetuous decisions. Republicans can choose to stand up to Trump or worship the ground he walks on, but nothing will save them from the chaotic whims of a mad king.
So, who was on Capitol Hill today? Was it the acting Attorney General of the United States of America? Or, as one Democratic lawmaker put it today, was it Donald Trump's consigliere? Todd Blanche came under withering questioning from Democrats over the wholesale replacement of the Department of Justice's 150-plus-year-old mission of upholding the rule of law in this country and around the world, with instead doing the bidding of an aspiring autocrat named Donald J. Trump. A key focus today, that $1.8 billion settlement funded by our money, taxpayer dollars. Our taxpayer dollars will now be used to compensate people who claim to have been wronged by the Justice Department, the so-called victims of weaponization. Here's Senator Van Hollen on that.
This is an outrageous, unprecedented slush fund that you set up. Simple question. Will individuals who assaulted Capitol Hill police officers be eligible for this fund?
Well, as it makes plain, anybody is
just let me know if they're eligible for the fund.
As was made plain yesterday, anybody in this country is eligible to apply if they believe they were a victim of weaponization.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. Are there going to be rules that say that if you've assaulted a Capitol Hill police officer or committed a violent crime, you will not be eligible? Why not make that a rule?
I expect that, because I'm not one of the commissioners setting up the rules, I expect that there will be rules.
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members, aren't you, Mr. Attorney General?
Pardon me?
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members.
I am appointing all 5 members.
You can certainly set up. There's also an individual who, after being pardoned by the president, went on to molest 2 children. And that person actually tried to buy the silence of these children by saying that he would pay them some of the funds that he was hoping to get from your slush fund. Can you commit to making the rules so that that person is not eligible for a payout under this fund?
Well, you're obviously lying in your question, because there's no way that this person committed to that. The slush fund, as you call it, which is not, didn't exist.
I'm certainly
but I can commit.
Mr. Attorney General, don't ever do that again. I am reporting
what
he said. He said on the expectation that he hoped to get some of the funds from a payout. He's been
you said from the slush fund, Senator, and that didn't exist when he said that.
This is the fund that the president and all of you have been telegraphing all along that you're going to use to help the president's friends.
Can you point to
Mr.
a single
Attorney General,
telegraph
I have a
I
last
made?
question.
What telegraph did I
have a last question for
Okay.
you. Do you know that it is a criminal offense to lie to Congress?
I am very well aware of that.
I'm glad to hear that.
A couple headlines there. Blanche acknowledging it is a slush fund, and we'll use his quotes if he'd like us to, but also suggesting that the child molester who was convicted for the crime of telling the child he molested that there was money coming to him in restitution couldn't have even known about the slush fund. The person that Senator Van Hollen was asking Todd Blanche about is named Andrew Paul Johnson. He's right now, as we come on the air, right now his status is this. He's serving a sentence of life in prison for molesting minors. NPR reports this about him. Police reported that man, Johnson, 45, tried to keep the children quiet by telling them he would share the millions of dollars in restitution money he expected to receive from the Trump administration in connection with his January 6 case, end quote. At one point, as part of his bungling defense of the slush fund, Todd Blanche suggested that anybody, any Republican, any Democrat in this country could apply for money if they, quote, believe they were victims. Watch that.
It is true that this is unusual. That is true. But it is not unprecedented. And it was done to address something that had never happened again either. So there is an unprecedented nature of what we did yesterday in response to years and years of weaponization. Just to correct a few things, Senator, it's not limited to Republicans. It's not limited to Biden.
It was.
It's not limited to the Biden weaponization. It's not limited to, in any way, scope or form to January 6 or to Jack Smith. There's no limitation on the claims.
Okay, so with that stipulated, is former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, eligible? His team argued that he was the victim of a vindictive and selective prosecution. What about New York's Attorney General Tish James? What about the Southern Poverty Law Center or Act Blue, or the 6 members of Congress who were investigated for simply saying out loud, non-camera, that the men and women of the United States military swore an oath not to follow any illegal orders? They have good claims? Are your hand-picked 5 commissioners going to grant their claims? I doubt. So in a world where Todd Blanche picks, as he said, he corrected the questioner, it wasn't just 4 members, it's all 5 of the commissioners who make the decisions, we can safely rule that out. This is also the same Todd Blanche who claims that there's evidence that Bill Barr couldn't find, or Brad Raffensperger, or any of the other Trump allies who looked really hard, that the 2020 election was indeed rigged. This is the same Todd Blanche who served as Donald Trump's defense attorney, the same Todd Blanche who now cannot definitively say if violent felons who assaulted cops will receive money from the quote slush fund. Here's what happened when Todd Blanche was pressed again about ensuring that money from taxpayers does not go to the most violent insurrectionists.
Will you agree to encourage those commissioners to set a guideline that compensation will not go to individuals who are convicted of assaulting police officers?
I expect...
Just a yes would answer my question, or a no.
Yes will not answer that question. I mean, you're asking whether I will encourage. I don't think that's a fair word. I don't think it's the Attorney General's job to encourage commissioners to do or not do anything.
Bar, forbid, ban, rule out. Change the word. Hours after that testimony wrapped up on Capitol Hill, news broke that the Department of Justice expanded its settlement with Donald Trump. A one-page document signed by, you guessed it, that guy, Todd Blanche, and posted on the Justice Department website, bars the IRS from ever pursuing an audit of Donald Trump or his family businesses. It's 407. We'll be eagerly awaiting the release of Donald Trump's taxes now that we know he can never, ever, ever be audited. That was his excuse back in 2016 for not releasing them. Politico and the New York Times were the first to report the news about the document. The Justice Department did not provide comment on the document to either news organization. The acting head of the Justice Department up on Capitol Hill, facing withering questions about Donald Trump's attempt to turn the office of the presidency into a personal piggy bank funded by the American taxpayer, is where we begin today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delaney is here. Also joining us, former Department of Justice pardon attorney Liz Oyer is here. She was fired by Trump's Department of Justice after refusing to reinstate actor Mel Gibson's gun rights. And with me at the table, back at the table for the hour, our friend Andrew Weissman's here. We're so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about the book. The new book is called Liar's Kingdom. It's so important. It's so good. It's so timely. It's about how to stop Trump's deceit and save America. We deal with lying. We deal with gaslighting. We'll pull that thread all hour, and then we'll dive into the book.
Great. A
little bit later on. I want to ask you about Todd Blanche's performance today. And there were actually a lot of guys. It's like a 3-ring circus, right? Vance was in one ring, Blanche on the other. The problem with performing for an audience of one, which is what they're all trained to do, motivated to do, is that the answers sound ridiculous.
Right. I mean, that is the reason he could not say, we are not going to give money to violent felons. If you remember, before the inauguration, you had the vice president, Ann Pam Bondi, suggesting, well, don't worry, we're going to do a triage of the January 6th defendants to suggest that the violent ones would not get a pardon. Well, they got ahead of their skis because everyone got a pardon. And so here you see Todd Blanche not being able to even say that minimally decent thing. But I think I'd like to step back one step to this. The entire thing is built on, in my view, a lie. I mean, the entire predicate for this is that there needs to be a fund because of the weaponization of the Biden Justice Department in going after people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th We saw it with our own eyes. Those people, there was no weaponization. Those people got due process. They either pleaded guilty or they were found guilty by a jury, or they were awaiting trial. That is not weaponization. That is
Mitch
the justice
McConnell actually justifies not convicting Donald Trump in his impeachment trial by saying he should be adjudicated by the justice system.
Exactly. So this is all predicated on something that they're just pretending, oh, of course, all those people were victimized. I would remind people, we saw with our own eyes the crime. And even with all of that abundant evidence, these people were given due process, the rule of law, and there was an adjudication. What is happening now is these people are being told, if you commit crimes for Donald Trump, not only will you get a pardon, but you now have the prospect of cashing in on your crimes. What is the deterrent effect now going forward when you've created this paid army with criminal impunity? Because there will not only be no criminal repercussions, there's a reward for what they're doing. This is gobsmacking, and the person who is announcing this and defending it is the head of what is our Justice Department.
Democrat of Massachusetts, who's joining me now and surveying all of this. What do you think about this fundamental dynamic that we now have of Trump's grip on the Republican Party, sort of arguably stronger even maybe than it's ever been, grip on the country weaker, and what that means for what happens?
So it's a tighter and tighter hold on a smaller and smaller group.
Yeah. Yes.
But that was really the point. I've heard the commentators say, and the people decided they didn't want to support Massey. No. Right. The people who showed up at a Republican primary decided they didn't want him to be their standard bearer. You know, if it's been an open, anybody votes. If this had been a general, I don't know exactly how that goes. Right. But I think this is the part. It's interesting to watch, and to watch what the dynamic will be on Republicans who say, man, I'm not crossing that guy, on the elected Republicans. We know who they belong to. But the reality is, we're 5 months out. We're going to have a general election, and boy, is that going to start shaking things.
So there's a bunch of cross pressure. I mean, right now we're already seeing the fallout in the Senate today. Yeah. Right. In a few different ways. I want to talk. One way was there was a war power resolution today. And for the first time, Democrats' party line, except for John Fetterman, have been voting for it. Republicans have been voting against it, except for Rand Paul. Those two have been switching. Today, Bill Cassidy, fresh off that loss on Saturday, crossed the line and voted with you and your colleagues to put it over the hump, which means it will now call a vote, is how I understand the procedure. What do you make of that development, and also what it portends for this Senate for the next 4 or 5 months?
Could you say more clearly that if I'd been voting my conscience all along, I would not have been voting with Donald Trump?
Talk about a confession. I mean, it's really wild.
It's just like a moment of just now we can see what's really going on. And so you look at all the other guys who are still voting in line with Donald Trump. You watch these election victories. And look, there's no voter who's going to be fooled after today, right? Is there anybody left who thinks that there is an elected Republican who is actually voting his conscience, doing what he thinks is best for all of the people of his district? How does he stand up in front of the electorate for the next 5.5 months as he faces the general electorate and say, you know what matters most to me? And with a straight face says, you, rather than pleasing Donald Trump.
Well, and I think there's a strange kind of coincidence of interest here, which is that both Donald Trump and I would argue the Democratic Party probably want it to be the case that voters understand that Donald Trump is the Republican Party and the Republican Party is Donald Trump. Well, I mean, at this point, right?
I mean, that's reality. We'd like people to understand reality. But here's the thing. What Democrats will do now and are doing already is they are both going after Donald Trump. Remember, the man who said, what would he do? He would lower costs on day one. And where are we on cost? Cost of groceries is up, cost of gasoline is up, cost of health care is up, cost of utilities is up, cost of housing is up. And he told us he would keep us safe and stay out of wars. And you can do your own count on how many he's in, but what I know he's
might be another one in Cuba, who knows?
That's right. $1 billion a day to kill people halfway around the world and still can't explain how that helps one single family here in America. So we're going to stay on that. But here's the other half. We're also going to be making the affirmative case. And that's not just he sucks.
Right.
Our case is going to be, here are the things that we'll lay out that we will commit to get done that will affect your family, that will lower your costs. I think that's going to be the key.
I want to talk about that contrast, but I want to stay on for a second on the way that he is using taxpayer money and pushing them. I mean, because you've got this I think this ballroom thing is really wild, right? I mean, originally it was, I'm raising private funds. Now it's, I must have $1 billion. He's monomaniacally obsessed with it. Over the weekend, the Senate parliamentarian, for somewhat complicated reasons, stripped out the ballroom funding out of the bill. They want to pass on a party line vote to begin with, right? They're not consulting you. There's no negotiation on this. And Trump is so obsessed with this. I mean, it's all he talks about, really. He did an event today about it. He calls up Thune, Senate Majority Leader, to basically say you should fire the parliamentarian. And he wants to get this through. But this just strikes me, I mean, when you're talking about this contrast of, like, what they stand for, like, they're spending $1 billion in the guy's ballroom as people's groceries, as all their costs explode. It is an opportunity to be like, well, here's what we would do with money.
Exactly. Right. Because that really is the heart of it. Donald Trump has now said, with the cameras running, now we can't do childcare, right? We can't do that because we got this war to fight halfway around the world.
Yeah, he literally said that. That's not I want to say that's not a gross mischaracterization.
That's right.
Explicitly what he said.
Literally said it.
Yeah.
He spends hours, right, online doing memes about the war or about Donald Trump in a triumphal arch or in a made-up AI thing where he's floating in the reflecting pool. He spends hours on this. He spends energy on this. He talks about the ballroom. And where is he on your groceries? Where is he on the fact that your utilities are up 67%? Where is he on the ways that his own policies, his tariff policy, his energy policy, his healthcare policy, and his war have driven your costs up and up and up and up? And the answer is nobody home. Don't want to talk about it. Get mad if somebody raises it. He doesn't want to talk about it. But here's what we're betting on, that this is what elections are about.
Yeah.
And when we hit the general election, Democrats are going to say, I'm going to talk about this stuff.
He has been very focused on the ballroom. He is very focused on, I think, essentially enriching himself, his family, and his supporters.
Well, that's the other half.
Right.
He's
I want to
also on making himself rich.
So I want to talk about this. I have you here. I mean, I have to say, this. To call it a settlement is too charitable and generous. It's a shakedown. It's not even a court-approved settlement in a technical sense, right? I mean, they're calling it that, but we've got a $1.8 billion slush fund that's going to be given out by essentially his appointees at will to whoever. Attached to it today, on top of that, as someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about tax fairness and particularly the tax incidence of the wealthiest and most connected Americans. A crazy rider that came out today that basically says they dropping all audits, can never investigate him or his companies or his family or anyone ever for anything. The IRS. I guess I'm left speechless. It sort of melted my ability to analyze it. But what is your response to it?
But you've got it exactly right. So start on the first part of it, and this is this $1.8 billion. Can we just underline here? That's not some random $1.8 billion. It's not $1.8 billion that fell out of the sky. This is taxpayer dollars. This is stand up in front of a group of people and say your money.
Yeah, dig in your pockets.
Your money. That's exactly right. Didn't go to lowering the cost of health care. It didn't go to child care. It didn't go to bringing down your costs or even paving a road out here. It went to Donald Trump to distribute, I don't know, to people who beat up cops on January 6th. It goes to whoever Donald Trump's favorite person of the hour is. Nobody gets ruled out here, no matter what kind of crook you are. So that's the first part, is the money part.
I mean, we should just say it's essentially explicitly a fund for crooks in some sense, because, I mean, which is not to say that everyone's prosecutor is a crook. I want to be very clear about that. But I mean, it's really pointing in that direction, just to be clear. Yeah.
Pointing pretty sharply, as in finger right at your nose. Yeah, okay. But look at what happens in the other part of what he's done. I don't know how else you could hold up a bigger sign that says the President of the United States is deeply concerned that he has committed tax fraud, members of his family have committed tax fraud over a long period of time. And as soon as somebody other than Donald Trump is in charge, those chickens are going to come home to roost and poop all over him. And so
right, then to
says,
insist on this as the settlement rider.
That's
yes,
right. That this is the settlement rider right this minute. And by the way, it almost has, you said you can't analyze it for me. It has just a little bit of the flavor of, oh, the general election is coming up. And if Democrats are there in the House and the Senate and have some control, they might be doing hearings, putting brakes. They may be reining in. So it's like watching somebody who's been gorging on corruption, who is loaded with corruption and says, let's stuff in a few more pieces before the guys come who might take the food away from the table.
On this sort of corruption priorities and cost question, which I agree is like the center right now of the campaign. It's like the guy wants to build a ballroom, wants to pay off his friends. Are you better off? You're not. Things are more expensive. His own war. He started all this. It's not like, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and costs went up. Joe Biden took the blame, but was not a lot he could have done about it. This is a very different situation. But there also is a question of tangibly, it's like even if you have Senate majorities, there's not a Senate majority, House majority, how much you can actually do to bring down costs for folks.
I don't see it that way. So I see what we can start with is we can do the investigations and start beating back on the corruption. And let's not forget on this, the corruption and the costs are not running independently. They're actually feeding each other.
Correct.
Why are your utility bills so high? Well, could part of it be that Donald Trump took $1 billion from the oil industry and keeps delivering on that? So every place where we've got oversight capacity independently to call people in, to cut off budgets, to demand from the various actors, may not be Donald Trump himself, but from the people who are running the administration, it gives us a purchase. It gives us a foot in the door to be able to push back on that. Second thing is look where we are right now. Donald Trump and the Republicans have nothing to show for having been in power for a year and a half. They're going to have to turn around and run on, hi, here's what we did, a ballroom that isn't finished and a reflecting pool that looks like a Holiday Inn swimming pool.
The estate act tax exemption is nice and big, taxes, I will say.
Tax breaks for billionaires, for Meta, for the big guys. Okay, that's what they've got to run on. One of the things we will be in a position to do if we have House and Senate is start pushing through our agenda, push through our child care bill. And now it's up to Donald Trump. What are you going to do, baby? You're going to veto it because it came from the Democrats, or you're going to pony up and sign it and reduce costs for American families. So don't tell me that we're going to be handcuffed until 2028. Nope. The fight starts the day after the election if we've got the power.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, thank you for making time and for being patient as we work through this busy election night. Great to have you here.
I want to bring in MS Now's Kevin Fry on Capitol Hill. Anthony Coley served as director of the Office of Public Affairs under President Biden and is an MS Now political analyst. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor and MS Now legal analyst. So I wonder what you make of what we heard today, Paul. This fund, we don't exactly know how it's going to operate. Seems like a lot of open questions for a huge amount of money.
Open questions about its constitutionality, important separation of powers concerns. The appropriation clause of the 14th, the appropriation clause says that Congress determines how federal taxpayer dollars are allocated. There's an argument here that the Trump administration is unilaterally creating a fund to hand out taxpayer money to its supporters with no congressional approval or oversight. There's also a really interesting kind of historical 14th Amendment concern, Chris. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment says that federal taxpayer money cannot go to anybody who's in paying an obligation or debt for insurrection or violence against the government.
So it says that specifically?
It does. Again, it was intended so that the people who rebelled in the Confederacy couldn't be rewarded. But it specifically says debts and obligations, which sounds like attorneys' fees and any other concerns that January 6th defendants have, can't be paid for by the federal government under the Constitution.
Anthony Blanche did say at one point that the president and his family will not get a payout from the fund. But if the president's allies, supporters, and donors can get paid, what questions does that raise?
It raises a lot of questions, Chris. And let me say this. I was in the room for most of this hearing today. The thing that struck me the most was the silence that came from Republicans on the rostrum. And Dr. King told us, I've been rereading a letter from a Birmingham jail and other historical documents. He reminded us that silence is complicity. And that's what I saw today. And if you go back and look at consequential moments in American history, take Watergate, for example, there were Democrats and Republican leaders who marched over to the White House to tell Richard Nixon that it was time for him to go. During the Reagan administration, for example, on the matter of Iran-Contra, there were Democrats and Republican committee chairs who called the Reagan administration on the carpet for that scandal. And even during the George W. Bush administration on matters with regard to wiretapping and torture, on the U.S. attorney scandal, you had Republican senators like John Cornyn and Lindsey Graham and Arlen Specter and John McCain. I mean, the list goes on. It's pretty long, Chris, of Republican members of Congress standing with Democrats when leaders of their party are doing things that are not consistent with the Constitution or American values. And it is that silence from Republican members of Congress right now that makes this moment so dangerous.
Since you were in the room, Anthony, take us inside. Did you sense any discomfort or hear anything that suggests discomfort about the idea of giving almost $2 billion in taxpayer money to people who may be friendly with the president of the United States?
No, and this is why I just don't understand it, Chris, for the life of me. When you led with Senator Coons's question, Senator Van Allen weighed in as well about this issue of law enforcement. People who attacked law enforcement on January 6th getting compensated out of this fund. I mean, whatever happened to Back the Blue? This is supposed to be an administration who is pro-law enforcement. But I hope every single law enforcement officer in this country sees this clip today, because it's further proof that this guy doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about, I mean, the American people are scratching their head right now. Why is this man focused on this issue and not their high gas prices and not their cost of living? And so, I mean, that's what I felt and others felt in the room today, in addition to just all the silence we're seeing from Republican senators.
So, Kevin, lawmakers also pressed Todd Blanche on how Trump might be involved in this process. What did we learn?
Right. So we know that when it comes to this fund, they're setting up, as part of the rules that were laid out by the DOJ in their document yesterday, a 5-member board. 4 of those would be appointed by the Attorney General, 1 additional one in consultation, they say, with Congress. But here is the notable phrase in here, that they can be removed by the president, who can remove any member without cause. Now, Blanche was pressed on how much involvement the president would have, despite that clause in the document. Here is what that exchange looked like.
Who are the commissioners?
They're not named yet.
Who will name them?
I will, or the Attorney General will. It's not me.
So, with the suggestion of the President of the United States.
Excuse me?
With the suggestion of the President of the United States, your boss.
I do not make suggestions. I will.
No. He will make suggestions to you.
I have no idea if he will or not. I really don't. I have no idea if he will or not.
I would be shocked if he didn't tell you exactly who to put on, and I'd be more shocked if you did not put them on.
Of course, some of the Democratic misbelief that you're seeing there from Senator Jack Reed is that we know, of course, that Attorney General or Acting Attorney General Blanche is one of those being considered for the full-time job. So part of this, I think, stems from the Democratic point of view, that they are like, well, if you're trying to get this job, of course you want to do what the president wants you to do. Also because the document lays out that for cause option where they can just essentially remove a member at their own volition. But this gets to the root of the concern we have seen from Democrats and even some Republicans since this was announced, which is essentially that this creates up a fund where the president can give out money through his folks that he is overseeing to anyone that he deems to be a victim of the last administration, including January 6 defendants. And so this kind of all goes back to that central kernel of concern from lawmakers.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, Paul, I do want to play what the president said, because he was asked about who exactly might benefit from this fund. And here's what he said.
These were people that were weaponized and really treated brutally by a system that was so corrupt, with corrupt people running it, and they're getting reimbursed for their legal fees and the other things that they had to suffer.
Do you believe that people who committed violence against Capitol Hill police officers on January 6th should be eligible for compensation from this DOJ fund? And are you or your family members going to be seeking compensation from that fund?
It'll all be dependent on a committee. A committee's being set up of very talented people, very highly respected people. I think it's a committee of 5. And again, I didn't do this deal.
You heard him say a committee of 5. Math is not my strong suit, but let's say this. All you need is a quorum. A quorum is 3.
That's correct.
So there could be 3 in a meeting deciding who gets this money. It's a majority vote. That means potentially 2 people could be making decisions that ultimately amount to almost $2 billion.
2 people, maybe ultimately it's one person, one man, President Donald Trump, because in this deal, he gets to veto, he gets to fire any one of the 5 commissioners. So anyone who doesn't vote how he likes, we know what's going to happen to that person.
Anthony, what did you hear from Todd Blanche in terms of justification to explain to the American people why nearly $1.8 billion in taxpayer money should be used this way, especially now when we know what the American people are saying about how much they're hurting?
I didn't hear very much, and I want to go back. You played the Trump clip at the top. Chris, he talked about this in past tense, but I don't think we should think about this just as past tense. I think he is sending a message. He's creating a permission structure. He's sending a message to would-be criminals that if you commit a crime in my name, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I'll pardon you. I'll make you whole financially. And honestly, that should send a chilling message to every American who is pro-democracy and pro-constitution, because it comes at a time when this man, his back is against the wall because of his low approval ratings. And we're going into a midterm election where his party is about to lose control of one, and if not both, houses of Congress. So that, to me, should be the takeaway about this. It's not just what happened in the past. He's creating this template for what could happen going forward, and calling really on a ragtag militia of people, just like we saw on January 6th, to turn over the will of the voters, potentially in 2026.
Paul Blanche said today that what they are doing is almost identical to a fund that was done during the Obama administration. Is it almost identical?
No, and he, in fact, admitted at the hearing today that it wasn't almost identical, mainly because in a typical settlement agreement, it's a judge who oversees the settlement to make sure that everything is on the up and up. Here, the Trump administration did this really neat hat trick where they filed suit and then they dismissed the suit and they say, okay, we settled it. But after the judge dismissed the suit, they're saying the judge doesn't have any oversight over it. And to Anthony's point about the message that this sends, Chris, 1,000 people pled guilty in January 6 crimes. That means that they came to court and they admitted that there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that they did what the government said that they did. An additional 250 were found guilty by a judge or a jury. Now, Trump, on his first day in office, pardoned 1,600 of those people. But Anthony's exactly right. The expressive message here is that people not only are getting away with crimes, they're being rewarded for crime.